Assalamu alaikum, peace be upon you all. This is your host, Amina Ahmed, and you're watching TV. Welcome back to another episode of NextGen on this week's theme of young women who are impacting our world, who are making some changes. And I always talk about the vision of NextGen, right? To amplify the voices of young people. And this is exactly what we're doing today by bringing in women of color, by bringing in Black women, immigrant women who are impacting us in our world in different fields. We're there on Galaxy 19 satellite, MuslimNetwork.tv, Amazon Fire TV, Roku, and soon on Apple TV as well. Now, yesterday we had a young Black woman speak on her struggle with environmental justice and how her struggle is different than that of her counterparts. And today, we have a young Shia Muslim woman who will be speaking on her experiences and the work that she does to inspire leadership. Laila Tauqeer is the young woman that we have with us today. Laila?
Salam. Thank you so much for having me. Very excited to be here. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for being with us today. Laila is a student at Harvard College. She's literally living out that immigrant dream. She's the president of the Islamic Society, a researcher within the Project of Shiaism and Global Affairs, and she serves as the executive director of Taha Collective and the director of Ma'arifa, a national organization that is committed to the spiritual and intellectual growth of Shia students. She also wants to work toward creating platforms and spaces that are safe and that promote, the Islamic framework toward liberation. Thank you so much, Laila, for all the work that you do.
Of course. So excited to be here, to be doing the work. Just wanted to make a small correction though. Just like executive board of Taha Collective, the director is someone else. But yeah, regardless, like very excited to be doing the work that I am doing and very thankful to be in the places that I am in.
Yeah, and before we get more into the work that you're doing, you can describe, the vision of Matif. I know how invested you are in that. Tell us more about your identity as an immigrant. You are from Pakistan. You were born and raised there as a visibly Muslim woman. How has that inspired some of the work that you do?
So I think like whenever I talk about the work that I do, my identity necessarily like as an immigrant or a woman isn't at the forefront. It's what drives me is more so my identity as a Shia Muslim, right? To like take everything from my faith and then move towards that. But all of those identities, regardless, like mean a lot to me, a young person, a woman, an immigrant, a Muslim. So like depending on what circle I'm in, like I feel like I have to highlight one more than the other. Oftentimes when I'm in like college social justice circles, I have to make sure that like my Muslim identity is heard. But when I'm in like Shia spaces, I have to make sure that my young identity is heard, that my woman identity is heard. Like I'm sure you're familiar with like men very much occupying leadership positions in our communities. So similarly, like I want to make sure that those voices are heard, like my immigrant voice is heard. So I think it also depends on like space to space. But because all these identities are important to me and I have so much to say and like so much energy to do things, like I want to bring them all to the table with me. Because like that's what makes me me. So I think it also just like depends on like what space I am in, like what identity I need to amplify at that point, what like voice is being suppressed. So just like depending on context, but very like I think inspired by and moved by like my faith to do all the work that I am doing and to amplify like all my other identities as well with it.
Yeah, and I think that you speak about how we need to create more platforms for Muslim women in this field and how all of your identities are interconnected, even though you amplify one at one certain point. Let's also talk about how you go to Harvard. That is crazy. Tell me more about that and how, your experience has been as an immigrant, and, a Muslim and all of that.
I think it's beautiful, it's challenging, it's very complex at times. It has brought me a lot of joy at times. Really like I think like as a first generation and a low-income student and like an immigrant, it has opened a lot of doors for me. And I think what like a lot of these elite institutions do for you is that they really make you think that anything is possible because people around you are doing like impossible work, which like I'm very, very grateful for, because like I don't know if I would be able to do the work or have the drive that I have right now if it weren't for the spaces that I'm in. But having said that, like I think as you grow up, you also slowly begin to realize that like these elite institutions won't save us. Rather, like what they do is they push you into capitalism and they push you into really like doing this work that doesn't benefit anyone, and they push you into like elitism too, where you begin to think that you're better than your community. So like for me, like I think like as I have moved, so I'm gonna be a senior now, and in this past year, it's just learned that like I should take what like moves me forward in my faith, in my work, in my organizing, take that from these institutions and just like move forward with the work, rather than rely on them to like make a name for myself or to go into the workforce that like it pushes us into. For example, like consulting, like you'll see so many Harvard students going into consulting. You'll see so many of them going into like investment banking. So just like taking like what you can, like all the good things from these places and then moving forward. Because yeah, like very much they embody the American dream, but like what is the American dream if it doesn't like liberate you or like save you, or like save your people? So I think like as a first year, like I entered with like googly eyes and like was ready to take on the world, but I think slowly you become jaded too, and then you like just have this realization that like we cannot rely on these institutions at all. So it's been sorry.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, no, it's just been, I think it's tough to like sometimes navigate those spaces because there's so much privilege in being there. But also like knowing how to use that privilege is just as important.
Yeah. And do you think that, further develops that disconnect between Ivy Leagues and Ivy League activists versus activists on the ground? And you say that you come from a low-income neighborhood and all of that, but then you go to this Ivy League school. So have you seen a disconnect?
Oh, definitely, definitely. I think like oftentimes, like when you're doing activism on campus, it becomes a bubble. Right? Like even being in Harvard, a lot of like Harvard activists are doing their activism on campus only, but like the Cambridge community exists and like the Boston community exists, and like these are real people affected by real things, which they will be affected for more than the 4 years that you're on campus. And like similarly, like I do feel like my life is like it's two different lives I'm living at home and then like on campus. It's just completely different, the struggles that like you face here compared to the ones that you're fighting for on campus. So I really do think it puts people in a bubble, and like when you begin to think that like you go to this like Ivy League, therefore you must know everything. But no, like people on the ground who have been doing this work for ages, like know all of this stuff, and we're just now entering these spaces. And I think a lot of times we forget that.
Yeah, I think that's very powerful that, you say that there is that disconnect, because sometimes we see people in that, elitist kind of mindset, not even accepting the fact that there's a divide. So your identity has obviously contributed to that. So tell us more about how being an immigrant makes your experience extremely different from people who are Pakistani first generation.
I think one of the things is that you're still like even though, so I've been here for 9 years now, but sometimes you're still caught in this like, don't know if I belong completely here or don't know if I belong completely there, because a lot of like childhood references or like TV shows and things like that I don't understand, the American ones, because I didn't grow up here, so like feeling left out of those conversations. But whatever's going on in Pakistan currently, like I also don't have a full grasp on that, just because like now I'm very much living here and like experiencing the political climate here, and things like that. So I think that gets tough sometimes, because I don't know if like I am the Pakistani diaspora now, but it's just like tough to I think sometimes like make sense of that in your head, that like I don't live there, but like yes, I consider it just as much of a home. And as for like the differences between like someone who like grew up here or like was born here, grew up here, compared to someone who came here, I think very different, in that like when you haven't seen the country and you've only seen it on the internet and you haven't really experienced it, I think sometimes people like very much romanticize Pakistan. But I think that's the thing with like being in the diaspora, right? Like you romanticize your homeland, but you forget that like there's problems that exist there. And then there's also that journey of like once you immigrate here, just the years it takes to get used to being here. And there's still times where like I'm just like I blank on so many cultural references. So there's still like that, like getting used to being here, being raised, like comparing yourself to folks who have been raised here, how their parents have raised them, So I think those are like just the upbringing and just the differences that come in that, and like the perspectives. Yeah.
Wow. And I think that what you said about the romanticization of the homeland is something that, as a first generation, I see that all the time, where we have first generations always talking about, in my experience, India, where we talk about Bollywood and the food there and the mangoes over there. But the reality at the ground in India is very different right now, right? Where we have, Modi government and things like that. So the diaspora have to do a better job at kind of taking the political side and the human rights side of their country, and then also taking the cultural side. But one of the things that I wanted to talk to you, Laila, is about your project with Marifa, because that is phenomenal. And I don't even want to talk too much about it, because I want to hand that to you, and I want you to tell us about the vision of what Marifa is all about.
So Marifa, it came to be because there's 5 of us on the board, and then we realized that students and like young voices are just not represented enough in Shia spaces specifically. And even when we're kind of reduced to this idea that like we only care about representation of our minority identity and nothing else. So like Marifa, like we created Marifa because we wanted to touch on all these nuanced issues and all these other things that we care about, right? Like we don't just care about our marginalized identity, we also care about what our faith tells us about justice, about community, about activism, about spirituality, about like academia, about like how to live your life holistically as a Shia Muslim and bringing your faith into everything. So that's kind of what Marifa is. To really like holistically look at what Shia Islam is for young Shia Muslims, not just like, oh, we want representation in relation to Sunni Muslims. It's like we're moving beyond identity and we're focusing on how to develop ourselves as young people. So that's really how the conference started. And I think it was wonderful for people, like for us to see each other in person, because that hardly happens unless like you go to like a big Shia conference. So that was like, it was so wonderful to connect with all these people who have only seen on the internet. And I think we did achieve our purpose in like moving the needle a little bit beyond identity and focusing on all these other issues that we care about.
Yeah, and what was the reaction, right, of the Shia community and those outside of that community as well?
They were so supportive. I think that was like the biggest thing, especially because one of the things that we wanted to do with this conference, and I think like I like try to make all of my work accessible. I think like being a low-income student myself, understanding the struggles, and like one of the things we wanted to do with the conference because of that was to make sure that it was accessible, because people would be flying to Harvard, people would be like living there for like 2 days. So we needed a lot of donations to make sure that there were scholarships for everyone who couldn't afford to make that trek. So it was like community really like poured in, like people supported so much, people donated so much, people sent so many kind messages, really applauded the work that young people are doing. And I think the most wonderful things were like when people who did this work when they were young, but the work necessarily wasn't sustainable, they reached out and they gave us tips and they were like, this worked and this didn't work, and maybe you want to consider this to make it sustainable. And I think that was the support that we needed to like keep pushing. Yeah, it was just great.
Yeah, and Laila will be talking more about some of the work that you're doing and how you relate Islam with these fights towards liberation that you speak about right after our short break. We're there on Galaxy 19 satellite, MuslimNetwork.tv, Amazon Fire TV, Roku, and soon on Apple TV as well. We'll be right back.
Your eyes.
Assalamu alaikum everyone, it's your brother Zain Bika from South Africa. One of the first educational programs ever produced for Muslim children was the ever popular Adam's World series. The colorful and comical Muslim puppets stole the heart of a generation. Sound Vision will be releasing brand new episodes of Adam's World with the launch of a Adam's World app. Subscribers will enjoy new Adam's World episodes as they are released, as well as all the classic episodes of Adam's World. So visit adamsworldapp.com now to learn more, subscribe and enjoy new adventures of Adam and his friends. And let's keep helping tomorrow's Muslims today. Assalamu alaikum.
It's Adam's World. Believe me, there's a lot to see. Bismillah, let's explore.
Welcome back to NextGen. I'm here with Laila, a young activist who inspires leadership inside her community. Now, Laila, in a lot of the work that you do, you speak about the connection of Islam and these struggles and fights towards liberation. How do you think Islam promotes these struggles, these movements?
Mm-hmm. I think one of the things that I really look to in Islam is like the 99 names of God, right? Like these are the characteristics of God, and like these are characteristics that we should embody. And one of them is literally justice. Like God is just, God is justice. So like looking at that and like really trying to embody that like that's what Islam is. And like when you look at the Islamic definition of justice, it means like putting everything in its right place. And that, like when you compare it to terms that we use today, like equity, right? Like equity comes to mind where like you are putting everything in its right place. So really, like I think looking at that, and then also like as a Shia Muslim, one of the things that we always keep going back to is the story of Karbala, where the grandson of the Prophet is fighting against these evil forces, right? So this like dichotomy of like good and bad, and really taking my inspiration from like the Karbala paradigm of fighting against evil. And one of the core principles of Shia Islam is literally justice. You have to embody that. So just going off of that and going off of like all these examples that you see in Islamic history, that you see emphasized everywhere in the Quran, and in like Shia Islam, you see emphasized like with the Imams, with all the with like in the books, in the work that people have been doing. So taking all of that and really bringing that into my work, that this is what Islam tells you justice is. Therefore, we must like strive towards this ideal. So yeah, like that's where a lot of my inspiration comes from for that.
Yeah. And I think it's beautiful how you portray that, and how you speak about how Islam promotes justice, because Allah is just, right? So and just the roots of Islam and what Islam it does. So that's very beautiful. But also I want to take it back to science and how you talk about the relation of science and justice and colonialism and all of these evils that we see in our world that you list, right? How are these two interconnected?
So it's been very interesting to like study history of science, because like when you look at science, you think of objectivity. But then when you really start to dig down, you like understand that this notion of objectivity has caused so much harm in the world. So for example, like scientists are the ones who backed up eugenics. They backed up forced sterilization. They backed up like all the medical racism that takes place today. They also like backed up this idea that like some races have smaller brains, therefore they're not smart, right? Like all of these ideas at one point were backed by science or are backed by science, even though it comes off as this objective thing. So really like digging deep into like all the harm that it's caused. And then obviously like there's colonialism too, and like how science is very Eurocentric. Like when you were learning about this, you only learn about the white names and mostly like white men, and not realize that like as like things were happening in Europe, like these scientific discoveries and this scientific work was happening all around the world. So like colonialism being tied into that too, where like Europeans again like stole so much, but also stole so many of these ideas, stole so much talent. And I think like that's why I really, really like studying science, because like when you're looking into science, it's just like these are objective facts, you should memorize them and like move on with your work. But no, like there's so much history behind it, behind all the people who are doing this work. Like, why are they doing it? Was it for money? Like, who was funding them? And just like their purpose behind everything. So I think that's the coolest part about like what I'm studying, really connecting science to the world today.
Yeah. And I think with, the Black Lives Matter movement and this new kind of, a lot of people will call it a start of a revolution, we're seeing these questions being raised again, right? The questions of medical racism and how even in the medical textbooks, we have diseases being portrayed only on white skin. So when doctors go out, they don't have, an idea. And as someone that is there work that's being done to kind of counteract the medical racism that we're seeing today?
Hardly any, I think. And a lot of that work has to start in medical schools too, and in pre-med classes. Like when you look at, I was pre-med for a bit, as is any brown kid. But like when you're looking at like the requirement for like being a pre-med, nothing states that you have to take these like common sense classes. These classes on how to treat all these like different patients. And similarly in medical school, I think like you see so many people talking about like how 2 classes on like ethics is not going to make you a better person. So I think like that's where the work needs to start, really. Like if you're not a good person, you probably should not be going into these fields where like people's lives are in your hands. Yeah.
And Laila, I want to take the conversation a bit back to when we were talking about how the Muslim community needs to do a better job at providing platforms. Where do you think we're at, first of all, right? And secondly, what can we do to create platforms for young Muslim women of all different backgrounds to come together and speak on their experiences and create change?
I think in the Muslim community, we're very elitist. So like the spaces that you occupy, like especially like when you look at masjid boards, who is on those boards? They're rich uncles usually, right? Like doctors and engineers. Similarly, in a lot of these like other positions, it's like your family has been in the United States for so long, and like you're like starting all these organizations, these like national nonprofits, and really like to enter those, you have to have a certain kind of ideology. You can't be too radical. You like have to be a moderate Muslim kind of, and really, so I think like for us, like as a community, like we really need to like move past that notion and allow young people to enter those spaces, and to enter those spaces without having any clout, I think, like, or without having parental influence. And we are very bad at it. We're very like closed off, insular, don't let people enter who aren't already in these circles. Yeah, so I think the work has to start from the ground to really like make these spaces inclusive, to let anyone enter them. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think for sure, right, the Muslim community always talks about getting young people involved in this work, but then when it comes to leaving their positions and giving it to young people, they're not too good at that. So I totally get where you're coming from, right? Where there is this admiration of young activists, but then there's no platforms for them to actually do their work. But Laila, before we end here, I want to get your advice for other young Muslim women who may be watching, who are looking up to you and some of the work that you're doing. What is your advice to them?
I think the biggest thing I would say is like having a good support network around you. And this support network, one, like it pushes you to do better. Two, like there should be people who call you in if you make a mistake, not like push you out or not call you out on that. And really people who keep you grounded in your values as to like why you started what you started. I think like I see a lot of people who like started with like so many good reasons, but then like now aren't necessarily sticking to those values. And I think your support system means a lot for that. People who care about you, people who will pull you back when you need to be pulled back, people who will push you forward when you need to be pushed forward. So I think like that's the biggest thing I would say. I think like like these like degrees, credentials, like networks, like those matter, but I think what matters the most is just the people who you are around and the people who make you better. Yeah.
And Laila, do you think that there are resources, actual places that young Muslim women can go to if they want to get involved?
So like now for Shia Muslim women, like the young Shia Muslim women, like there's obviously Marafa that we have expanded beyond just the conference. Otherwise, I don't know many places that are actually like open to this work, and I'm sure there are. I'm just not familiar with many of them.
Yeah, but you just gave like that little plug to Marifa. So if you
Yeah.
are young Shia Muslim women,
Yes, look us up, follow us. Yeah, but like small things like I'm sure you're familiar with like Islamic Scholarship Fund, right?
Yeah.
Like pushing young people into doing non-STEM work. Similarly, like Engage or even Care, right? Like these things that are giving people platforms.
For sure. And thank you so much, Laila, for being with us today. Everything you said was powerful, enlightening. And I think that we got to hear from a young Muslim immigrant woman, her perspective and her journey towards doing some of the work that she's doing. So thank you, Laila, for being with us. Thank you for our audience for tuning in. And we'll be back tomorrow with a new episode and new young empowered women. And until then, assalamu alaikum. Peace be upon you all.
Thank you so much.